Hello, I want to do a review on the glsswrks kazemi, which has been out for a little bit over a month now, and I've been using it ever since. It's a really, really good pad. If this is a question of quality for you, then you can't really do any better than this pad. It's kind of stunning how much they've innovated in a space that's a bit oversaturated right now, where there's anime pad after anime pad. All of them are just the SkyPad 3. This one is wholly unique as an aiming experience, and especially in terms of feel, it's so good. So any thoughts or complaints that I have about it are going to be either subjective or about GlassPads as a whole, because in terms of this pad's quality and in terms of doing what it sets out to do, I think it's basically perfect, which is very high praise. This thing is insane. So as a pad, it's kind of in the balanced area of speed. It offers a little bit more control than something like the SkyPad 3 or SkyPad 4, really any of the other glass pads that I've used, aside from the Serapad, but that one doesn't really count. I haven't used the Empress or the Glaze, so I can't give you a comment on that one, but everything else that I've used, it's been a little bit slower than. However, the speed that it has is very well balanced, in the sense that it doesn't feel slow. It just offers a small amount of control and gives you a little bit of the extra ability to stop without having to apply a lot of force on the mouse. It doesn't feel sluggish or sticky or anything like that. You're not fighting the pad. It's really good. Aside from that, in terms of size, it comes in 490 by 420. I think the dark one comes in 500 by 500, but yeah, the one that I have is 490 by 420. The base is rubberized, similar to most other glass pads these days. Things like the Super Glide and SkyPad 4. Everything's using rubberized bases these days, which is good. It's industry standard. Industry standard just improved. So this is no different from those. Does the job, does it well. So when I was talking to Tekusai also does the Kurosen stuff, which is also beloved by the AIM community. So when I was talking to him, I was telling him about what I didn't really like about the SkyPad 4, or what I did like about the SkyPad 4, I should say, where it actually was quite good at dealing with dust. It was a really smooth surface, but my issues with more speed related. And he said yeah, I agree, it does those things well, but I think the kazemi does them even better. And I agree with him. I have never touched such a smooth object in my whole life. It's kind of staggering what they've managed to accomplish with this thing, where when I run my hand across it, it feels almost numb because of how smooth it is. It's almost sensationless. Not entirely, of course, but it's that feeling of touching ice when you're numb, basically, where it's just so unbelievably smooth that it's almost you can't detect the surface changing as you move your hand across it. It's really, really consistent surface. On top of that, it also is the only, not just glass pad, but one of the only pads that I can use without a sleeve, which is an insane accomplishment, for me at least. There is one pad in existence that I could comfortably use without a sleeve, and it's the Energon. Every artisan pad I've tried, some of them have been fine when the conditions are just right for me to not use a sleeve, and this one is better than all of them, except for the Energon. But that has its own problems too. However, for that to be the case with a hard pad is really, really impressive. I don't really understand how they managed to pull that off to make it so the pad is so smooth on the arm to the point where it is that good without a sleeve. Because I had kind of written off hard pads as being something you could use. I thought it was just part of the deal. It's if you want to use a hard pad, you have to use a sleeve or else your arm will just get stuck forever. And for me, saying that it is pretty good without a sleeve, I still use one because when I get really sweaty, it's not great still. For me to say that as a person with glue for arms, it's going to be good. I think for the average person who doesn't have such sweaty arms or sit in the posture that I do, I don't really know why my arms are so bad with stickiness. I think it'll be really good. So, let's see, what else? Skates. They also, maybe because of the smoothness, maybe something else, this pad is not that skate sensitive. That's kind of the thing with glass pads that a lot of people don't like, is that you do have to be pretty picky with the skate that you apply to your mouse, because it does make a pretty significant difference to how fast it is, how smooth it is, and just like the general aim feel that you have while using the pad. But with this one, I wouldn't say they're all the same. I don't think that's fair. You definitely can notice the difference in speed and to some extent the difference in like texture and stuff, but it's not nearly to the extent of other pads, especially glass pads. But yeah, if you want a glass pad where you don't have to obsess about skates, this is definitely something to consider. I mean, if everything else also stands out to you. Like for example, the SkyPad 4, people talk about how skate sensitive it is, where like the pad goes from like a 10 out of 10 to like a 2 out of 10 if you just got the wrong skates. You don't have to worry about this. Or at least I don't think you do. I've used like the plastics, the jades, the obsidians, and the cyclones. All of them have been like fine. So also the sound is so much more muted and pleasant than every other glass pad I've used, especially when dust isn't part of the equation. You can still detect it, of course. It's not like perfect in the way that you can like have cat hair on your cloth pad and still be able to aim okay. You'll notice it for sure, but it is much less common for like a single speck of dust to be under your skates and to be like obsessing about it, like for the SkyPad 3, for example. But yeah, just in general, it's a much more smooth, pleasant sounding mouse pad than a lot of the other glass options. So if that's something that matters to you, it's like it causes some like sensory issues for some people, then yeah, another point in its favor. This pad still is very fast. I would not consider it a control pad by any means. It's definitely still in like that very fast glass pad range. It just offers more control than like the pure speed glass pads do, and I think that's a good thing. I think it really illuminated for me what a small amount of friction can do for your aim, right? I talked last time about the tension release, where like when I flick to somebody, I try to stay loose so I can continue tracking as soon as I end the flick, or at the end of the flick at least, I loosen up. And the amount that I'm able to loosen up and still have good speed and stopping power is much more noteworthy on a pad that has some friction. As in, because the pad is helping me stop, I can apply like almost no pressure on the mouse and it'll stop on its own by the end of the flick. And I can't say that's necessarily true for a lot of other glass pads, especially the SkyPad 4. And like this particular property of the pad is kind of illuminated for me what was so problematic for me with the SkyPad 4 in terms of stopping power, where it felt really good when I was using Hisense, where the amount of momentum my mouse had was fairly low. But when I was trying to use mid-range or low sense, it was almost impossible for me to be smooth post-flick, because the pad offered so little resistance that I could not use any of the friction that the pad had, because it doesn't really have any, to help me stop. I had to apply a greater amount of force, and while it wasn't a lot, it was still enough to throw off my aim at the end of flicks. Especially like when I'd panic, I'd have to utilize a lot more tension in order to keep my mouse stabilized in the surface like that. And part of that is skill issue for sure, but I also do think that in an ideal world, friction is not something you're fighting against. Or maybe not ideal world, but like in terms of technique, friction doesn't have to be something you're fighting against. It can be something that you factor in to your aiming process. You can utilize it as a means of helping you stop and allowing you to manage that tension in your aim a lot more effectively. This thing also helped me bridge the gap to using cloth pads again, because Viscos and I had this video idea at some point where she cannot really use, I mean, she's still good with glass pads, let's not go crazy, but like she can never feel like fully confident with her mechanics on glass pads. And we came down to the conclusion that it's not like a skill issue, it's not a mouse control issue, obviously. It's a technique incompatibility issue. And our idea was that we will have one of us. I'm the person who can't use cloth pads because of like the arm stickiness issue. I'm so used to having like extremely low static friction, things like that. So I was like the other side of the coin for that video idea. This pad has kind of made it so I'm able to use cloth pads again. Not that I was like horrible on them before, but like it helped me get better at the tension release and helped me become more conscious of how much tension I can release, to the point where I actually want to use cloth pads again. I actually kind of want to spend like a month or two practicing with like maybe the Energon or maybe like a free for all or something, just to see how far I can take that technique. I also want to make mention that this thing offering some control, like, first of all, it was something I was looking for in a glass pad for a while. I thought that it would be a really cool thing to accomplish and do it well. But it also, first of all, it does do that. And it's exciting because, like, it felt like I had another variable to control in my aim, and when mastered could allow me to be a lot more consistent with my flicks. However, I have two potentially negative things to say. And I think this is, one of them is an interesting side effect of it being so smooth, and the other one is more of a general statement about glass pads. So the interesting side effect is the fact that this thing is so smooth and frictionless on the skin that it almost doesn't provide that ability to use your fingers as skates. I don't know if how commonly known this technique is, but a lot of top aimers will dig their fingers into the pad in order to stop the mouse. And this pad is a lot worse at doing it than the Sky Pad or Super Glide was for me, because those weren't as frictionless on the skin. So it's, I don't know, it's a fairly niche technique, but if it's something you do, I could see it being a pretty big problem for you on this pad, because it did definitely require some adjustment for me. The general discussion about glass pads is this question of theoretical limits again, where a lot of people, their argument in favor of glass pads is that because you're in control of every action on the pad, or like every small movement in your hand is going to be reflected on screen, it gives you or requires a greater deal of mouse control, and thus has a higher skill ceiling. I don't know if that's necessarily fair anymore. After using this, like, it really feels like friction doesn't have to be something that's a necessary, I wouldn't say downside, but like you're not fighting against it. It can be something you learn to control. And I think when friction control and tension control is mastered, you have a higher skill ceiling. It really seems to me like pushing speed with a well-rounded like middle ground sensitivity is exceptionally more difficult to be consistent with on a glass pad. And like obviously there are people who are way better than me who have done amazing things with glass pads, but to have like super well-rounded in-game aim with a glass pad seems, if we're talking about like viscose level aim, where she's good at everything. She's good at like extremely fast TS, good at like really swift, smooth tracking, reactive tracking, everything. I feel like it's a lot harder to get to that level of well-roundedness when you have a surface that doesn't offer you friction as a tool. So yeah, I wouldn't say that I'm like disillusioned with glass pads or anything, or I think they're like not viable. I just think that it's kind of opened my mind to the idea of using something else and seeing how I do with it, practicing with that for a while. But yeah, honestly, that's kind of a pro of this pad, where it's so good at what it does that it makes me question how good glass pads are, you know? Because it feels like we've reached the peak of glass pads with this thing. It feels like everything that I wanted out of a glass pad, and I'm still left, I wouldn't say unsatisfied, because it's amazing, it's really fun, but in terms of the amount of control that I would want out of my pad, I don't know. It's possible also that like it doesn't lean quite enough into the control. There are some pads like that where they're not necessarily bad at anything, but they're so average at everything that it doesn't feel like it has enough of a niche, you know? Like a lot of pads, like the free for all is really good at what it does. It has its niche and it sticks to it really well, but it excels at its one niche. The SkyPad also does that, where it's like got a very particular small audience, but for that audience, it's like the best pad of all time. I don't know if this pad is like that. I think it's possible. I'm not saying this is definitely true, that it's a little bit too much in the middle ground. Maybe if it leaned a little bit closer to Control, I could see myself like using this forever. But it is very balanced, which maybe is a takeaway or like a demerit on its overall endgameness, I suppose. But that said, like all the things I'm saying earlier about how it is kind of like a perfect glass pad is still true. If you just want a touch of Control in your glass aim experience, I would definitely recommend this because it's so unbelievably smooth. It's just nice to run my hand across, honestly. And all the other benefits you usually get out of glass pads, of like this extremely low static friction with the effortless micros, it's still there. You just have like a little bit more ability to stop, which is, I don't know, it's really impressive for Glassworks to have done this. But yeah, I honestly still want to give it like a 10 out of 10, just because it is so good at what it does. All of the things that I have that are negative to say are like almost exclusively preferential, or just, you know, pertinent to all glass pads. So in terms of what it sets out to do, it's still kind of perfect. I definitely would give it a go if you're in the market for a new glass pad. It's the one to me that seems like you could develop the most well-rounded mechanics with. But yeah, thanks for watching. I have a few other ideas for things I want to review in the near future, but we'll see. Anyway, yeah, I'll see you next time.